The ancient city of Hasanlu is one of the largest archaeological sites in northwestern Iran, and one of the most thoroughly excavated. For this reason, Hasanlu is essential to understanding the rich history of the region. The Penn Museum has worked for decades to protect and study the extensive collections discovered at the site, including over 260 human skeletons.
Hasanlu is an extremely pivotal site for the archaeology of northwestern Iran. Much of the chronology of the region is based on work done at the site, and it's one of the best excavated sites in that part of the world. The Penn Museum first investigated the site of Hasanlu in 1956 when former museum director Robert Dyson went to Iran to do an archaeological survey of the region. When Robert Dyson got to the site of Hasanlu and began to excavate it, he quickly realized he wanted to make it the focus of his regional survey. Part of that was due to the magnitude of the site, but also a lot of it had to do with what he found there. And one of the things they found was that the citadel had been destroyed around 800 BCE and razed by fire, whether it was an intentional fire or an accidental fire. There were people in the streets where they had fallen, where they had been slain, and during the fire a lot of the buildings collapsed onto them, so it was kind of an unusual find in archaeology, sort of frozen in time. From archaeologists I've talked to who were there on the ground doing the excavation, they found that the experience was extremely emotional and harrowing for them, especially the excavation of what appeared to be family groups where you had women and children together in their final moments. Who attacked the city of Hasanlu is still unknown. The consensus seems to be that the Urartian Empire were the invaders, but the Assyrian Empire was also very prominent in the region. We don't have any indication, either from the skeletons themselves or from the artifacts, exactly who the invaders were. People of Hasanlu are also kind of mysterious, and I'd honestly love to know more about them. The city of Hasanlu itself is considered proto-historic. They didn't have any writing at the site. Other regions around them did have writing, but for this reason, we don't know how they would have identified themselves, and we don't have a great sense of exactly who they were or what language they would have spoken.
The Hasanlu specimens were actually sampled for particular isotopes to see whether or not there were differences within the skeletal series and the diets that were consumed. And basically what we found is that at least the two isotopes which were used in that capacity actually showed that diets of the individuals were quite varied, but they weren't patterned in any particular way. So the diet's primarily wheat and barley. They're eating probably primarily sheep and goat, and that is really reflective in the isotopic signatures. We also have isotopic signatures coming from oxygen isotopes, which are used to talk about settlement patterns where a person was actually born and raised and moved to. And basically it seems as if the Hasanlu folks all were born and raised in the area of Hasanlu and lived there for their entire adult lives.
So the Hasanlu Lovers were two skeletons that were excavated in 1973. They were found in a mud brick and stone bin. They were found together in an embrace. Their arms were around one another, and one of them is reaching out a hand to touch the face of the other one. In terms of something that's emotionally evocative, it was about as good as it gets in archaeology. The lovers remain mysterious on many levels. Initially, there's been some discussion about the actual sex of the individuals involved. And in seeing a tender embrace like this, we also tend to make some assumptions about the relationship of the two individuals. So upon examining the lovers, it appears that both individuals are male. We're really interested to find out the results of DNA testing on the skeletons and how that compares to our skeletal assessment of their biological sex. So the pelvis is probably the single best criteria for using from the skeleton to estimate sex in individuals. And again, that has to do with the fact that childbirth poses a really strong evolutionary constraint on the dimensions of the pelvis for females. We have to have bigger pelvis to be able to have natural childbirth with our big-brained babies. And so for that reason, you get some distinctive qualities about the female pelvis. One of which tends to be in this front area where this piece, which actually forms the joint at the front of your pelvic halves, is kind of pulled forward. And one of the things that that does is it makes the angle underneath relatively wide. In a male pelvis, that part doesn't have to be pulled out so much, and this ramus tends to be a little bit bigger. So what you end up with is a much more acute angle underneath the front of the pelvis. There are lots of other features on the pelvis that are useful, one of which that I'm fond of is the sciatic notch. And the sciatic notch in males tends to be relatively narrow. You really shouldn't be able to wiggle your thumb around in there too much. And in females, it tends to be a lot wider. One of the things about the older one of the Hasanlu Lovers that really threw me initially was that his sciatic notch is really wide. So for a male individual, that was unusual. In the younger lover, we didn't have the front portion of the pelvis that had been lost. But what we did have was the sciatic notch. And again, that sciatic notch is so incredibly narrow that I felt really confident that the morphology of this individual would probably be male. The Hasanlu collection is pretty vast, and it was really exciting for me to get a chance to work on it because there were so many skeletons, and I felt like I could do a very good comparison of features across a relatively stable population. And so what you'd find in any human population that you looked at is there will be a variety of expression of any trait. And so even within Hasanlu, with these 4 skulls here, all of which are male, you're going to have a variety of expression. And that variety comes not only from individual traits, but also from age. So if we look at the younger lover here, the pelvis on this individual was distinctively male, but a lot of the skull features haven't fully developed yet, simply because he's still in the process of maturing. If you look at these other 3, though, you can see, even within males, a really different expression of things like brow ridge development. This guy here has an absolutely amazing brow ridge. You would definitely have noticed his brow ridge when he was living. And you can compare it to these other 2 who also have pretty male development in that region, but not nearly as extreme. And that's really one of the things that you can benefit from in a deep collection, is the ability to look across different specimens and get an idea for that population's range of variation.
Recently, the Hasanlu skeletons were sampled, small bone sample, for a DNA, an ancient DNA analysis. The analysis was done by David Reich at Harvard University, an expert on ancient DNA. He gave us a genetic sex determination on those skeletons. Both of them are male. Doesn't necessarily clarify the relationship of those 2 individuals to each other. They could have been strangers, they could have been family members, they could have been lovers, they could have been in any relationship with each other. It just so happens that they were found in this unusual condition associated with each other. There can be many results actually from DNA testing on this kind of level. Depends on the questions. So questions could include the relationship of those individuals to other folks within the region, or even far afield of that region. That's within the realm of possible with this kind of DNA study. For me, I'm very interested in knowing the relationship of the individuals within the site, both geographically and over time, because we're able to do that with the Hasanlu collection. Be very interesting to see a result associated with that. We, of course, are very interested in understanding how the town was actually sacked, who the sackers were, where they came from. Are there 2 types of people coming from 2 different regions that are part, essentially, of this assemblage of bones from the site? These are the kinds of things that we could talk about and answer, essentially, with these genetic tools.